In this next section, we're going to look at frequency distributions and other statistical graphs. And so we'll start with what is called a
frequency distribution. A frequency distribution is a table that consists of some classes on one side, and then called a frequency distribution, some frequencies on the other side. So you have some classes and then the frequencies that match up with those classes on the other side. That is what is considered a frequency distribution. So we see this first example that's already made out for us here, this frequency distribution. And basically what it says is that you have classes that range from, on the first one, 42 to 51, and it has an F, a frequency of 3. What that means is there were 3 class averages between 42 to 51. And then the next class starts at 52 to 61, and actually there's an error here. This last class has to go up to 91. The reason being is we want all of our classes to be the same size. And then we can start talking about what are called upper limits. Upper limits of our classes are just the upper and the higher numbers of our classes. Lower limits are the lower numbers of our classes. Those are called your lower limits. And the frequencies here are just an added up tally of what's actually in your class. Now notice, here's another thing, where one class ends, the other one has to start at least 1 unit after that. The reason being is you don't want to have any overlap between your classes or you might get things double counted. For instance, had the first class stopped at 51 and the next class started at 51, had you had a test grade of 51, it would have got counted in both classes. So we'll never see an overlap between your classes. So no overlap between classes, because you don't want to be counting things twice. Also, all the classes must be the same size. So that they have the same number of numbers in them. So the question becomes, how do you build one of these little frequency distribution tables from scratch given a set of data? So let's look at an example set of data. So we're going to look at this one that's in the middle of the page. That's going to be our data set. Well, before we do anything, you want to put it in order. So let's sort it from smallest to largest. So we went ahead and did that for you. So sort the data first, because we need to figure out how many numbers our classes need to cover. Well, to figure out how many numbers we're going to actually cover in our class, we first of all have to start with our smallest, which is 71. That's our minimum value. And figure out what our largest number is. Our maximum value is 123. And if we put it in order, it's a whole lot easier to see that. So that means how many numbers are we actually covering? Well, to figure that out, you'll take the highest, which is 123, minus the lowest, which is 71. And that gets us a total of 52. And that's what's called our range. That's how many numbers we need to include in our classes. Okay. Now, how do we actually make the classes? Well, first of all, somewhere in our problem, they have to tell us how many classes we're going to need. So they have to tell us to use 5 classes or 6 classes, something to that effect. Well, in this one, I'm going to go ahead and say, let's use 5, because that's pretty standard. So that means, how do I find out how I'm going to figure out how many numbers go in each class? Well, we have something called the class width. And you take your range of numbers, which we just found was 52, and divide by how many classes we want, which is 5. The problem is you're always going to get a decimal of some kind. We get the number 10.4. And it has to be rounded. Well, we're going to always round up no matter what. Even if this was a 10.1, we would round it up to 11. And that's our class width. And what that means is we want 11 numbers in each of our classes. And that makes sure that each of our classes will have the same size, the same number of numbers, and it will cover all the numbers from 71 all the way to 123. It might go a little bit past 123, but it will cover all of these. Had we only used 10, what would have happened is our classes would have been too short. Now let's see if we can build our frequency distribution. We're going to do this on the next page. The question is, how do we start, first of all? Well, we're always going to, number one, start with our minimum value. Well, what did we say our minimum value was? I believe it was 71. So we're going to go to our table and we're going to always start with our smallest number, which in this case was 71. Now, what did we say our class width was? We said our class width was, because we have to round it up always, our class width was 11. How do we make sure we actually end up with 11 numbers in our class? It actually seems weird, but if we have a class width of 11, it means to get 11 numbers in our class, we're going to actually use the 11 as how you're going to get from one class to the next. So we'll add 11. That means the next class is actually going to start at, adding 11, 82. Well, if the next class starts at 82, it means the first one must have ended at 81. Keep adding 11. It means that the second class also ends at 92. Well, then it means the next class, adding another 11, will start at 93, but it will also have to end at 103. Adding another 11 to get to the next class will get us, let's see, a 104. And it's going to go all the way to 114. And the last class, adding another 11 on both ends, gets us, let's see, 115 to 125. And notice we do go a little bit past our largest value, which was 123, but that's okay. We are going to have some place to put 123. Now what we have to do is go back to our original problem and see if we can tally up which values are going to land in which classes. So our first class, I'm going to color code these just to make it a little bit easier, is 71 to 81. So I'd be looking for, going back to our original data set, and let's see, our original data set, let's see if I can see what that was. So let's take a look at our data set. We've got it here again. So let's count all the numbers between 71 to 81 for our first class. Well, we just have the number 71. So if you wanted to, you could do a tally, but you don't have to. The frequency of numbers between 71 and 81 is just a number. There's just one number. Then you move on to your next class and you say, okay, what numbers are between 82 to 92? Well, 82 to 92 is 82, 85, 86, 87, 87. That's a total of 5 numbers. Again, you don't have to do a tally. You can just go ahead and add them up. And the next group is looking at 93 to 103. Well, we have to include 103 in that. That's a total of, again, 5 numbers. And next one, the 104, let's see, to 114. Take a look at our list. 104 to 114, that is 104, 108, and 112. That's 3 numbers. And lastly, let's see what we have for our last group is the 115 to 125. And that's the last 4 numbers. And that's everybody. I would make sure that they add up. So however many numbers we have in this case, the 1, 5 gives you 6, plus 5 more is 11, plus 3 more is 14, plus 4 more is 18. And make sure if you go back to the original problem, it did say that we have 18 numbers, just to make sure that you didn't miss any. Now, if they ask for a frequency distribution, we are done. That is all that is required for a frequency distribution is classes and frequency. However, a lot of times they will tack on extra information for you to find, such as midpoints and relative frequency and cumulative frequency. So let's kind of find everything all at once. So the next thing that they might ask for is what are called midpoints. How do you find the midpoint? Well, midpoint sounds like middle. Well, that's exactly what it means. You want to find the middle of your class. Well, how do you find the middle of 2 numbers? Well, if you think of 2 numbers, let's say 10 and 20, you don't think hard, you know the middle is 15. Mathematically, though, how do you find the middle? You take the 2 numbers, you add them up, and you divide by 2. And that's what this formula for midpoint says, is that you're going to, in order to find the middle, you add the 2 ends up and divide by 2. You're basically averaging to find the middle. So, for instance, on this first one, I have the first class is from 71 to 81. So if I wanted to find its middle, I would do 71 plus 81 and then divide it by 2 and see what I get, which would get me 76 for my first midpoint. And then I could do the same thing for the second one, 82 plus 92. And then whatever I get for that would need to be divided by 2, which would get me, and without any math, I actually know it's already going to be 87. And I already know what the next one's going to be. It's going to be 98 without any work. How did I come up with 98 without doing any work? Well, that's the trick, is using your class width when you can. I can just go ahead and once I've got one of the midpoints, I can use the class width each and every time, add 11. So what would the next one be? Adding 11 again would be, let's see, 109. And the last one would be 120. What you may want to do is, if you use the little class width trick, is to just go ahead and double check the last one by doing that one by hand. Why? Because then if the last one's correct, all the ones in the middle are probably fine too. So it means you probably didn't make a mistake. Moving along, we'd like to talk about now how to find relative frequency.